find this diagram and we're going to fill this out together just for cellular respiration. So the organelle where it happens is the mitochondria. Cells have lots of mitochondria. They can have hundreds and hundreds of mitochondria. Some cells will have more mitochondria than others, depending on their energy needs and how much ATP they have to produce. And remember again that both autotrophs and heterotrophs will use cellular respiration. So do not think of this as an animal-only type thing. That's a common mistake people make. This happens in plant cells in exactly the same way it happens in animal cells. You have a space to write inputs and outputs. So I'd like you to write those inputs and outputs from this equation. The inputs for cellular respiration are glucose and oxygen. The chemical formula for glucose is C6H12O6. It's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and these little numbers tell you how many of atoms of each. So you can see, like in this picture here, the carbon is the gray circles, and we can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You will need, for every one glucose molecule, a cell needs 6 oxygen molecules, and that's what the coefficients mean. And I'm just showing all the molecules here so that you can see the equation when it's balanced. So you can see all the atoms that come in being accounted for at the end. Okay, so those are your inputs, glucose and oxygen. When glucose and oxygen react, it gives off 6 carbon dioxide molecules, 6 water molecules, and a bunch of ATP. So notice how the carbon atoms that were in the glucose are now in the carbon dioxide at the end. We've basically broken this glucose molecule up into a bunch of much tinier, simpler molecules. And the hydrogen atoms from the glucose have recombined with oxygen to give water. So those would be your outputs, carbon dioxide, water, and you can also write ATP. I want to connect this back to the carbon cycle again, just to remind you, like combustion is turning fuel into carbon dioxide. A car is turning the carbon from gasoline into carbon dioxide. Cellular respiration is basically the combustion that happens within biological systems. We're taking food, carbon-based food, and turning that into CO2. And because that's an exothermic combustion type process, energy is released that the cells can use. So if something is like lying on the ground decomposing, like in this picture, as it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, most of its mass is actually going into the atmosphere. Or, if you're, when you are breathing out carbon dioxide, and the whole time you've been sitting here listening to this, you've been breathing out carbon dioxide, every carbon atom that you breathe out was actually part of your food not too long ago, or possibly part of fat stores in your body at one point. Okay, so all the carbon that comes into your body and gets stored in your body, either through food and fat, eventually is going to end up back in the atmosphere someday as carbon dioxide. The reason why oxygen is used, we'll kind of next week get into how cells can get around this without using oxygen, because there are some places on Earth where there's not a lot of oxygen available, like in swamps, for example. And so some living things can make ATP without oxygen. But the thing about oxygen is that oxygen allows for the most complete combustion of glucose. And by breaking this glucose molecule, like you see on the left, into all these little simple molecules, like carbon dioxide and water, you're getting the maximum amount of energy released from that molecule. And so actually every glucose molecule can produce 38 ATP molecules. Think of glucose being like a big fat energy package, and cellular respiration allows you to like break that up into lots of little tiny batteries that you can use for little puffs of energy at different times. So it's like, need to do active transport, puff, ATP. Need to move your muscle fibers. Every like little contraction of the muscle fibers is like one little puff of ATP being used. So it gives cells a lot of control. There's so much energy in glucose that it's not usable for cells, but releasing that energy and capturing it in ATP allows that energy to be used in little different packages when it's needed. So double check that your notes are complete here. I did add ADP over here on the input side just to kind of show that you need ADP coming in so that you can then have the ATP coming out. So to kind of wrap this up, the last thing I want to talk about is just how cellular respiration and breathing are not the same, because a lot of times people, see this equation and they think, oh, oxygen's coming in, carbon dioxide's coming out. This must be talking about breathing. We must be talking about something that's happening in my lungs. But cellular respiration is not happening like in your lungs for your whole body. The cells in your lungs do need some ATP, so they do cellular respiration. But I do not want you to think about this process being something that happens in your lungs. Your lungs bring oxygen into your body because you need that oxygen for cellular respiration. Your lungs also exhale carbon dioxide that's like a waste product from cellular respiration. But cellular respiration is happening in the mitochondria of every cell in your body. It's happening in your brain. It's happening in your pinky toes. It's happening in your liver. It's happening in, everywhere. It's happening everywhere in your body. Okay. So the relationship between breathing and cellular respiration is the kind of question of like, well, how do I get that oxygen to my brain? How do I get that oxygen to the little muscles in my pinky toes so I can wiggle my toes? So we will get into this more in the spring when we talk about human body, but breathing is just you bring oxygen in, and yes, carbon dioxide goes out, but your lungs are not turning oxygen into carbon dioxide. That's a very common misconception that people have. So in the diagram, I'm going to uncover pieces of the diagram here, and I want you to think about purple following the path of carbon atoms, okay? So and when you breathe in oxygen, your lungs actually have tons of blood vessels in there, and that oxygen just diffuses into your bloodstream. Okay, your red blood cells are like your oxygen carrying things. That's what carries oxygen in your body. So when you breathe in, oxygen goes into your blood. When you eat and you digest your food, your intestines actually absorb glucose into your blood. So your blood is carrying oxygen and glucose everywhere. And so that's how the mitochondria in your brain, mitochondria in your pinky toes, they're getting oxygen and sugar from your bloodstream. And then once oxygen and glucose gets to all those cells, that is where cellular respiration happens. This glucose plus oxygen reaction happens in the mitochondria of all your cells, all through your body. And then the stuff to do it, the glucose and oxygen, gets delivered there by your blood. When the carbon dioxide is given off, that's actually a waste product. It can build, if it builds up, it can actually create like slightly more acidic conditions in your cytoplasm. That's not good. So you need to get excess carbon dioxide out of your body. And so your bloodstream actually carries it back. This picture makes it look like your red blood cells carry CO2, which they don't. But the carbon dioxide just sort of is carried within your bloodstream. And then when it gets back to your lungs, it goes into your lung space and then you exhale it. Okay. So the point is that I want you to be able to separate for yourself breathing from cellular respiration. Yes, breathing is about bringing in oxygen and taking out CO2, but cellular respiration is this process in the mitochondria of all your cells. So to recap, today you've learned about the purpose of cellular respiration. This is all about making ATP. This is why your cells need oxygen so that they can combust your food and release energy to recharge the ATP. You've learned the equation for cellular respiration. If you need to go back to just make sure you've written down those inputs and outputs, please do that. And you've learned more about the flow of energy in cellular respiration, that we're taking energy from food and transferring that energy into ATP. And we're also losing some energy as heat, but we'll get into that next. So thank you. Rewind if you need to finish your notes or watch or check anything else, and you're ready to move on to the next part of this lesson.